Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome to another Wednesday night Bible study here at Faith Baptist Church's Facebook and YouTube Live. So glad to have everybody. Y'all let me know how the audio is, if you can hear background things, if I need to be louder, if it's not clear enough, before we continue on. But I do want to say welcome on in. You guys be in prayer for one another. Have a couple of things. You guys on the group me. I was praying for Jacob and his test today, and he thinks he did really well. We won't know. We won't know for a little bit, but we appreciate your prayers. Do be in prayer for my grandmother, who is pretty sick and has been to the doctor and got some really strong antibiotics and everything. But we really need your prayers on that one, so we would very much appreciate it. Trying to think if there was others. I feel like there was at least one more that I can't remember. But maybe not. I feel like there was something else on the group me, but I don't think maybe there was. So that's it. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Sylvia. Good evening, Miss Christie. Thank you so much to Amanda and Sylvia for liking the live stream. I appreciate that, you guys. And for you guys on YouTube who like the live stream as well, your name doesn't pop up because of privacy settings and so forth, but we appreciate you. So tonight we're going to be talking about the book of Ruth. I was going to go right into 1 Samuel. I'll just go ahead and tell you guys. But the first lesson in 1 Samuel is my favorite story to talk about on Mother's Day. And I didn't want to talk about it here on Wednesday night and then again on Mother's Day here in a couple weeks. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into Ruth for a few weeks. It's a very short book, but it's a very fun book. It's got some great stories in it. Hopefully you'll be inspired. Hopefully you'll have some fun reading along. And y'all don't mind if I pick on Amanda for a little bit while we live stream, do you? It doesn't matter if you mind. I'm going to do it anyways. Oh, it's good to see everybody's names popping up there online. Hope you guys are having a fantastic evening this evening. You're halfway there, guys. It's all downhill from here, right? Monday and Tuesday, that's uphill, right? You get to Wednesday, that's like the peak. And then Thursday and Friday, it's all downhill from there. You get closer to the weekend. So we're excited about it. Let's go ahead and I'm going to jump over to the Bible study, but if you guys have something that you want us to pray for or just a question or whatever, leave a comment and I will do my best to get to it. All right, so let's hop over there. Hopefully the microphone's working and everything runs smoothly. And you can still hear me. Let's go. But the Bible's not up. Let's go. That's my notes. That's not... Where's my mouse? Okay, there we go. So, not quite smooth, but smoother than most weeks. We'll take it. Okay. So, I need to set up... I wish I could set up where it would read out loud y'all's comments for me. Because I can't see your comments right now while I've got the notes and everything up. Oh! Light bulb. I do actually have a second stream. Or a second screen. Alright. Good evening, Aunt Rhonda. And hi, Mom. Okay, so we're looking at Ruth chapter 1. Is it showing? Thank you so much for liking the stream. I appreciate that. Yeah, okay, so we are in... No, that's 1 Samuel. That's where we were going to be, but I already told you guys about that. There we go. Ruth chapter 1 tonight. It says in verse 1, it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, so this is still during the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, there is some controversy about this. as to whether this man should have left Israel or stayed and trusted God to take care of his family. There is no law in the book of Leviticus or in any of the Old Testament which dictates that it is a sin to leave the country. Right? Now, they left because they were starving to death. Now, how many of us would have made any sort of a different decision? It's easy to read these stories and the, what is the word I'm looking for? The generalizations, right? And the brief nature of the things we read, and read it like it's a book of fiction. And to say, well, the characters clearly made a mistake there because they should have, A, B, or C. But the truth of the matter is these were real people. And it's easy to get disassociated from that. To think of these stories as stories and not, things that actually happened to actual people. So there's this guy living life, trying to feed his family, and now there's no food. I mean, try to put yourself where this guy's going through. He's going to supermarkets. There's no supermarkets, but it would be like if we went to supermarkets today and there was no food on the shelves. The grocery stores were barren. This is what he's going through. So he's leaving to go to a country where they do have food. And how many of us would have done the exact same thing? So he sojourned into the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. Is that a door squeaking? Oh, it's not the door. It's not a door squeaking. It's my dog. Anyway, the name of his wife, Naomi. The name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. It says, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. So, again, very brief nature of what we're reading, but extremely tragic things happening in this course of time. Her husband died, and she was left and her 2 sons. So the man of the house is now gone. It's mom and the boys. So it says in verse 4 that they took them wives of the women of Moab. They can, actually. And the name of the other, Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. Good little chunk of time. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the women was left of her 2 sons and her husband. The woman, I'm sorry, not the women, but the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. So she's lost her husband. It doesn't say why. There's some speculation. There was a war that took place about this time that might have meant that they were fighting in this war. But if they were from Israel living in Moab, I doubt they volunteered to fight in the war. They may have been forced to. But for whatever reason, whether it was sickness or whether it was famine or drought or war, they died. The why isn't really important. God, we get so caught up in details that God wants us to move right past. God sort of saying, you're missing the point. The point isn't how they died. The story isn't their story. The point is they died. This story is Ruth's. Right? So we come to these first 5 verses, and we want to talk a little bit about where this book takes place along the timeline of the Bible. So we know from the first line of the first verse in the book of Ruth that this book takes place at some point during the time of the Judges. So then our question becomes, which judge? Okay, so the time of the judges takes place between the death of Joshua and the time of the reign of Israel's first king, Saul. So it covers the entire book of Judges, a little bit toward the end of the book of Joshua, and it fantails a little bit into the book of 1 Samuel. So for those who are familiar with the Judges, you can see that the Bible mentions specifically 14 people that judged Israel during this time. So there are a couple of context clues that help us narrow down which judge was ruling during the event of the book of Ruth. The first clue I notice was the famine mentioned. However, no famine took place during the book of Judges, nor during Eli or Samuel's time as judge. This is probably because during a transition between judges, a lot of time is summarized in just a verse or two. And that's kind of what we read in these first 5 verses. We read the entire largest lifespan of this woman, Naomi. The majority of her life was lived in those 5 verses. So, in a very similar way, you've got a whole lot more life being lived, several generations sometimes, in fact, when the Bible talks about just a couple of verses. Right? So we got to keep that in mind as well. The second clue that I noticed was that when the famine took place, Elimelech took his family to Moab. So that means this must take place during a time when Moab was doing better than Israel. And probably better than a few other neighboring nations as well. Otherwise, he would have taken his family there, right? So, only one passage fits this description, and that is the early years of the reign of Ehud in Judges chapter 3. This might also explain what happened to Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, which we mentioned before. We talked about that war that was going on that some people think they may have gotten caught up in. This war might have been during the time of Ehud between Moab and Israel, whether for Moab or for Israel, and possibly died in the war. But that does tell us kind of where this story takes place and our best possible guess. It's possible that I'm wrong. That is quite possible, but I think this is our best guess. So if somebody goes, no, that's not true, it wasn't during that time at all, highly possible. But just given the information we're given in the book of Judges, I think this is our best guess. So we say all that to say it's important to remember that all this pain and suffering could have been avoided. Okay, so Elimelech and his dying, and I find the verse we just read. Mahlon and Chilion, both of them dying as well, along with her husband Elimelech. Naomi could have avoided a lot of pain and a lot of suffering here if Israel had just stayed true to the ways of the Lord. It's when God's people divert from God's way and they go their own path, when God is telling them to go this path, on his path, that God's people find themselves in trouble. Now, it's not always going to be rainbows and sunshine, right? God's people still have struggles. We still have difficulties. But God sees you through those things. And Israel is now suffering because they chose to forsake the God of Israel. So it's important to remember that. None of this might have happened. None of this might have been necessary if Israel had just remained true to the ways of the Lord. But what we see in these first 5 verses is a slippery slope. Elimelech and his family had to leave the promised land. Okay, now I call it the promised land. We know it's Israel. We know it's the promised land. Because I want to put that thought in your mind. Because there was a time that this land once flowed with milk and honey, as they called it. The grapes of Eshcol, where it took 2 men to carry 1 cluster of grapes, right? So what happened? How did it go from that much bounty and that much blessing to completely drying up in famine? Because we see famine several times throughout Israel's history, right? Sorry, my nose itched. Okay. So what we see is the blessings being taken for granted. And all of these things that God had given them, and them taking them for granted, not caring so much about the fight to get them, or the God from whom they came. This teaches us a lesson for ourselves in Christianity here in the New Testament age. Don't take your blessings for granted. Right? Don't take for granted the power of your faith. And when you choose to have faith in God and you keep that faith in God, the blessings that come as a result of it. A lot of times we don't count a lot of the blessings that God gives us because they don't necessarily show up in our bank account. But God's blessings show up in more than just monetary ways. In the New Testament, Jesus talks about, but the Gospels tell us about a tree that Jesus came to. And he comes to the tree, and I imagine it was quite a gorgeous tree, but it didn't produce any fruit. So he cursed the tree, and the next time they came across it, it had withered and died. The disciples were amazed by this, but the lesson being, don't go to the many trees of the world that seem beautiful but can't provide the fruit of blessing. Go to the one that can produce the fruit of blessing. Go to the Lord. Live that Christian life. Right? The 2 sons of Elimelech, they married women of the Moabites. It is a common misconception that the law of God provided by Moses instructs Israel's men to only marry Israelite women. This, however, is not true. What the Bible warns Israel about is marrying women of idolatry. In other words, being careful about marrying women who worship other gods. And why? Why be careful about that? Because what we see with Solomon, what we see so many times throughout Israel's history, is that you marry this woman who worships these other gods, and she turns their heart from the one true God of Israel to their false gods. So God is here warning them, hey, don't marry these women of idolatry. Now, a woman from another country may be familiar with the idol worship that takes place there, but she might not necessarily adhere to it, or she might, once she meets the man, repent and begin to worship the one true God of Israel. And then after she does that, then can marry into his family. These things do not defy God's law. Remember a woman who wasn't a member of Israel before Ruth, who lived in the city of Jericho. The harlot Rahab, who was then made a part of Israel and then made a part of the bloodline of Jesus. So this very much does not defy God's law. So they marry these 2 women, and these 2 men die after their father has died. And Naomi has to bury her 2 sons. The most unnatural form of grief. is for a parent to grieve their children. When you grieve for your parents, or you grieve for your grandparents, or your great-grandparents, that is more natural. I wouldn't necessarily say, biblically speaking, that death is natural, because when God created the earth, there was no death. So none of it feels right to us, and that's the reason, because it's not natural. It wasn't supposed to be. But this is the natural way of things now. But for a parent to bury a child is most unnatural. And this is what Naomi's going through. So she says in verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. So evidently this is through the course of time. Elimelech has showed up. He's freed God's people. They've repented and gotten right with God. And he's lifted the famine from off the land. Verse 7 says, wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. So she's going home, but they're still technically a part of her family. She's the matriarch. She's sort of the leader of the family. So these two women are obligated, as far as how sociologically how things worked back then. They are compelled to her. Right, so they go with her. And Naomi, that's what makes verse 8 and on down so incredible and important. Because Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. So evidently they have dealt with this whole process of these men passing with much honor and much respect, which isn't always the case. But Naomi was grateful that these two women looked to ease her burdens rather than make them more difficult. She says to them in verse 9, the Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb that may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. So she's very, very bitter here. And what's happened is these two good women have said, we'll go with you. We'll go home with you. And she says, there's no sense in that. Do not throw your lives away because of my tragedy. She said, if you come with me, are you going to expect to marry sons that come out of my womb? She says, I'm old. I'm too old to get remarried, let alone have children. She says, and then suppose I do marry tonight and somehow have children. Will you wait for them to grow up and become adults before you then marry those children? She's saying, don't throw your life away because God was mean to me. That's literally what she said there in that last verse. I'm not making that part up. That's what she said. That the hand of the Lord is gone out against me is word for word what she just said. She's very, very bitter about her loss right now. She tells them, go home, that you might find peace and happiness with a new husband of your own people. Imagine how hard this must have been for Naomi to do. She's telling the only family she has left to leave her forever. And yet, despite all that Naomi has gone through, this verse shows that deep down she still has a caring heart. She cares about these two girls, these two young women, and she doesn't want them to suffer like she's suffering. So through all the pain and tragedy and loss that Naomi's dealing with right now in this story, she still cares about people, especially those people that have been so good to her. All the things that she lost, and yet she retained one of the things that is most valuable in each and every one of us: compassion. The worst thing you can lose. It's hard to lose family. It's hard to take steps back in life or to be stuck in the mud. It's hard to grieve. It's hard to lose. It's hard to lose out. But the worst thing you can lose in times of hardship or heartache is your ability to be compassionate. You let yourself become a mean, bitter, ornery person, then you've lost your most valuable thing, right? She tells them to go home so that they can find hope. And Naomi literally says in the middle of verse 12 that she has no hope for herself. She's given up on having family, on having loved ones in her life, and she's ready to live the rest of her life in loneliness and in despair. But what she's going to learn through the course of this awful tragedy is that there is always hope in God. And in these darkest hours, you cannot see it. You will not see it. You won't. You never will. Until the day that God chooses to reveal it to you. Romans 15:4 says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." These stories we're reading tonight about Ruth and about Naomi and about their family is written for our learning, Paul said, so that we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures and taking the time to meditate on these Scriptures and think about these stories and how they apply to us, we might have hope in our lives. He's saying God put these stories here for you in the days when you feel stuck, when you feel broken, when you feel betrayed, when you feel all these dark, empty, depressing thoughts. He says he wanted to put this here for you to know that you're not the first. And there have been many that come through this same dark tunnel you're in right now that also found an escape from that tunnel as well. And that you're not necessarily stuck there. But if you stop moving forward and you stop crawling, you might be. There's always hope in God through patience and comfort of the Scriptures. And that's important for us to remember. Verse 14 brings us to the response of these women. She's made some good points. If you stay with me, you're giving up an opportunity to ever get married or have a family or ever have a happily ever after. You are giving that up to live with me in darkness and despair for the rest of your life. And that's what it would have looked like. So it says they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. In other words, a farewell kiss on the cheek or whatever, as was custom back then. But Ruth clave unto her. She said, "Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law." So remember this thing about returning to her gods. She doesn't really care right now. Remember, she said in verse 13 that the Lord has gone out against her. She is very angry and upset and is not interested in religion, is not interested in faith, is not interested in scriptures. She's very bitter and angry, and a little bit, at least, toward God. So she's saying, go back and worship whatever you want to. I don't even care anymore. How broken she must be here. Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and whither thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." Oof. That makes you think a little bit, doesn't it? She's saying to Naomi here, if you reside in darkness, if you give up and choose to live the rest of your life in bitterness and despair, then you're dragging me into it with you. If you give up on your life, then you are sacrificing my life as well. She's saying if you give up on your people, then you're giving up on me as well. And she said, if you give up on your God, then you are sacrificing my relationship with him as well. Man, that makes you think, doesn't it? How many people are affected by your decision? We preached a sermon this past Sunday about Peter returning to the fishing boat, and one of the things I love of reading about that story is how many of the disciples went with him. He gave up on the work of the Lord to return to being a professional fisherman. And most of the disciples went with him back to the fishing boats to give up on their work of the Lord. And here we see Ruth telling Naomi, if you're going to give up and live in darkness, you're dragging me with you. So she's trying to encourage her mother-in-law to live life again, to try to find some semblance of hope again, if for no other reason, for Ruth. And it's so true about you and me as well. How many people are affected by us? How many people give up when you give up? How many people stay home from church when you stay home from church? You go to a church that's got a whole lot of cotton candy and not a whole lot else. They're handing out treats and they're watching football games instead of getting to the deep things of God. How many people are you dragging off with you? How many people, when you put that Bible up to let it collect dust, when your prayer spot stops having where your knees usually are in prayer, how many people also leave their prayer spot? How many people give up when you give up? Naomi couldn't give up because of Ruth. And you have a Ruth somewhere in your life. You may not know it, and you may not realize it, but you do. People are going to give up when you give up. She loved her mother-in-law. She loved the Lord. And she's reminding Naomi here, if you give up on him, then you're making me give up on him too. So then we see in verse 19, it says that they two went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that, and this is a little ironic that they're in Bethlehem right now, and we'll see why toward the end of this book. But it says that all the city moved about them, and they said, "Is this Naomi?" So life is pretty good for Israel again, and they've got food, and things are okay, and they've just come out of oppression, most likely, if this is a time of the judges. And they see Naomi returning, and they're thinking, oh, good, another thing that God restored to us. God returned Naomi to us. But this is not the same woman. There's a darkness about her. She's been infected. She's been plagued with an evil. Not that she's become evil, but that evil has plagued her. And she said unto them in her hollowness and emptiness, in the husk of a soul that she has left, call me not Naomi. Call me Mara. Now let me explain. The name Naomi, some of you are already familiar with this, but there are some perhaps that are not, so let me explain to them. The name Naomi, it means sweet or sweetness. And she said, don't call me that anymore. Don't call me sweet. Don't call me sweetness. I have no sweetness left within me. She said, call me Mara, because the word Mara means bitter or bitterness. So she's saying, all I have left within me is bitterness, is disgust, is gall, and vile, and dark, and empty. She says, that's all I have left within me. I have no sweetness left anymore. All I am is bitterness. You can feel the pain, the anguish this woman feels with every breath she takes. With every second of life is nothing but pain and anguish for her. And the only reason she keeps going is for this last good woman left in her life named Ruth. She doesn't want to keep going. She doesn't want to keep trying. But Ruth, what would happen to Ruth if Naomi gave up on life? Somebody needs you to hang in there tonight. He says in verse 21, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. If you think Naomi isn't bitter and angry toward God in a sinful way, then you are fooling yourself. People that go, well, this is true, it's not necessarily that she's angry toward... Yes, she is. She's angry toward God like many of us would be if we lost all the people that we cared about in our lives. There's very few people who would be able to keep going better than Naomi is here. And I can tell you right now, I'm not one of them. I wish I could tell you I was. I know I'm not. But I am able to see the blessings that God puts in my life and thank Him for it. This is one of the ways He protects our souls, folks. But that's the thing about bitterness and darkness. It doesn't last all the time. Eventually the sun comes back up one day. You just got to hang in there long enough to see it. She didn't want to, but Ruth made her. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? She's almost painting a picture of God bullying her, which I'm sure is how she must feel. God bullying this poor, innocent little woman. What she doesn't realize is that God did all of this necessarily to bring Ruth to the right place in the right time so that she might be made part of the most important family in all of human history. Now, I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, but suffice it to say, God had a plan. And Naomi's pain was a tragic but necessary part of it. However, verse 22 says, So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. And it's no coincidence, folks, that it mentions that. Because we're going to see in verse 2 how barley harvest is going to play an important part in things going from bad to good for this tragic family. It being the time of barley harvest right when they return, that's going to mean something. It meant nothing to them here, not yet, but it's going to mean something here in a minute. They couldn't see it. They couldn't see how anything was going to matter ever again. But it will. And I don't know where you are tonight, guys. I don't know if you're in a place where it feels like nothing has any value anymore, where it feels like nothing matters anymore. Maybe you're in a good place, and if you are, I'm so very glad for you. But if you're in a bad place tonight, or maybe you come across this later on, and you're in a bad place then, you got to remember it's not going to stay that way. It will get better, but you have to give it time, because God is waiting for your barley harvest. He's waiting for the right time and the right moment to bring you where He wants you to be. And I promise you guys, if you just hang in there and you keep faithful and you keep patient and you keep true until the time that God is ready to reveal His blessings and His plan to you, you will be very glad that you did. All right. Well, that is our lesson for this evening. I'm so very glad all of you. Let me bring this back over here real quick because I keep looking up and that's looking weird. But I'm very glad all of you were here this evening. Be sure to pray for one another. Like I said, be sure to go through your prayer list and so forth. And we will be back on Sunday morning to continue our series in encountering our Creator. We're going to start going through the flood, and I'm very excited for it. So like I said, we'll be back on Sunday morning. Until then, guys.